I'm pretty sure you didn't expect me to compare a Lenny Loud episode with a Carlota Casagrandes episode, and the fact that these two characters ended up having an episode together in season 6. Believe me when I say this is literally the only ways I'm ever going to find these two characters competing against each other in one of the focused episodes. Driving Miss Hazy and Undivided Attention. This may be crazy to think about, but considering that I've mentioned earlier in the year that Lincoln and Carlota have something in common, it's fair to say that Lenny and Carlota do have something in common, and it has nothing to do with fashion. In Driving Miss Hazy, Lincoln needs Lenny to get her driver's license because the only way he's ever going to get out of the Loud House by using Lori for transportation is that if he does any of her chores. And considering that Lenny isn't really the teaching type, believe me, you'll probably understand the similarities once we get in further into this video. When it comes to Undivided Attention, Carlota is obsessed with fashion so far that she can't be able to pay attention to anything, including her homework, which leads to her father to set up a date for her, which she mistakes as an actual date. Believe me when I say this, even though that in the Loud House episode it's a driving episode, while this episode is being too focused on your device rather than important things, what really makes this a lot more unique is the fact that Lenny and Carlota can't be able to focus on anything, and yet when they'll focus on one object when Lenny is being distracted on insignificant things in Driving Miss Hazy, while Carlota is being focused on Fashion Safari, the characters, or in the Casagrandes case, one needs to guide them. In all honesty, the fact that you can easily see that there are similarities, and while the main objective of them all is highly different, is honestly a huge accomplishment. And believe me, the fact that Lenny and Carlota have this something in common, other than being into fashion, just showcases of how much that I look into these episodes a lot more and come up with these ideas. With Driving Miss Hazy being one of the first episodes of the first season, which focused on Lenny, it showcases how Lenny is developed and how she is definitely an airhead. And mostly not the good kind, but back then it usually works out. And considering that Carlota isn't really an airhead, unlike Lenny, and the fact that she's mostly distracted in Fashion Safari, it's literally no surprise that her obsession with fashion is literally on the same levels as Lenny, which explains onto why they have an episode together. But at the same time, knowing full well that she's a little smarter compared to Lenny, it kind of makes her appearance and motivations in Undivided Attention mostly questionable. Like, I will admit I did have problems with Carlota upon watching this episode for the first time, but at the same time, the Loud House also has its share of problems. And believe me when I say this, the fact that there was no antagonist in Undivided Attention, it's probably a plus. Lenny in Driving Miss Hazy, even though that she's only getting her driver's license because Lincoln convinced her to, is the highlight of the episode. And since that this is the first episode centering around Lenny, she really had a good first impression. Which the same thing can't be said about Lori, but knowing full well that Lori is established as the opposite of how she became as the series progressed, it's mainly of how the execution of the earlier episodes of The Loud House is mostly debatable. But for me personally, I honestly felt like that even though that Lenny is still being an airhead at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that she had one of the good moments and also one of the most humorous moments in this episode. But as far as I'm concerned, compared to what Lincoln went through, Charles pretty much had the worst week of his life. Mainly of the fact that Carlota doesn't even pay attention to him, since that she mistakes this as an actual date. And not only that, when it comes to her obsession with Fashion Safari, it's really impossible to think that she manages to succeed at the end of the day. Because as far as I'm concerned, knowing full well that Carlota ended up becoming the problem of this episode as I first watched it, it kind of sums up on the fact that Carlota isn't supposed to be perfect completely. And even though I'm fully aware that her similarities are a lot more similar to Lenny when it comes to her obsession with fashion, it actually shows that her obsession with Fashion Safari just showcased the nature of what app games like Fashion Safari is like Pokemon Go or Angry Birds, just to name a few. And to be perfectly real with you, the fact that this is mainly a virtual reality game, not really, but mostly a game where you use your camera to find the objects and collect them or some sort, you can instantly tell that they really want to take this into high gear, since that I've mentioned in my loudest large versus launch out video, well, Lincoln is addicted to video games, Carlota is addicted to an app game. It may be one, but at the same time, it's still a game nonetheless. Granted, it should never be a high priority when it comes to doing your homework, which led to Carlota and Charles to be kicked out of the library due to Carlota's obsession. But at the same time, it shows that Carlota has flaws, and even though that sometimes flaws in character developments can go a little too far, I have to admit that this is the prime examples onto why that in the current seasons of The Loud House, it lacks on the fact that whenever the characters have flaws, it's done correctly, not incorrectly like in one of the worst episodes. Getting back into the Loud House episode, while everyone else aside from Lori joining in to help out Lenny gain her driver's license, or at least trying to learn how to get her driver's license, it kind of showcases on the fact that everyone else is under 16, and the only way for them to go to different places aside from relying on Lori is Lenny. Let me tell you, this is the type of development that really lacks in the later seasons, and even though it may be effect when it comes to one of the worst episodes or poor decisions made by the writers, it's really depressing that these characters ended up getting dumbed down as the series progressed, making them more dumber than smarter. And as far as I'm concerned, the fact that this show has this issue, it really makes this episode difficult to take itself seriously. But at the same time, since it's focusing on Lenny's driver's license and the fact that they have no other alternative other than relying on Lori, they literally have no other choice. And with Lenny ending up gaining her driver's license in season 6, which is somewhat of a good sequel towards this, to bring back the old days, this is literally the closest we're ever going to feel nostalgia when it comes to the Loud House instantly bringing back old elements from the past. Because, as far as I'm concerned, this is literally one of the only occasions where they actually succeeded on giving us nostalgia. Now, granted, in comparison in the Casagrandes episode, you can instantly tell that Carlota instantly is focusing on one element and she's instantly mistaken it. But at the same time, Lenny will have taken Carlota's position and she will probably think of the same way. Believe me when I say this, I did talk about the Lenny episodes in these types of videos. And I know full well that even if we see a different alternative where she's mistaking something rather than doing something correctly, she wouldn't do anything to what Carlota did in Undivided Attention while she's intentionally being annoying and obnoxious in front of Charles. You know, at the same time, the fact that Carlota instantly is mistaken on the fact that what she's doing involving her tests is a lot more important, and the fact that going on a date with someone involving schoolwork is honestly one of the weirdest ways that she is mistaken of, and the fact that I honestly saw that as a problem. Rewatching this episode just showcases of how much that everything involving Carlota's life is basically her development of what she is trying to succeed. Especially since that in the long shot, she needs to do a sports activity in order to graduate. So in all honesty, if she doesn't do anything involving this, then I'm pretty sure he won't go anywhere. Granted, it may not be the case when it comes to some characters in some form of media, but that's a completely different story. Though in Carlota's defense, Charles didn't realize that Carlota was having a date with him, even though that he didn't think that Carlota was being that upset when it comes to being forced to be in this scenario, even though it was all a misunderstanding. Everything about these two characters is basically a huge misunderstanding, and even though I side with Charles completely, that doesn't automatically mean that I'm against Carlota 100%. Though let's be real, that episode makes it superior all because Driving Miss Hazy has Lori messing up Lenny's chances on getting her driver's license because she put headphones on her that could instantly get Lenny killed. Let me tell you, it was difficult for Lori to get some kind of redemption and development in order to become a better person than she was in season 1. Lori in this episode is really bad. Obviously for multiple reasons in other episodes, but in this, the fact that she wants her siblings to do most of her chores so that she can only favor them back by driving them to places is honestly really sickening. Like, it may be something that the Loud siblings are mostly petty for, but considering that Lori ended up nearly causing Lenny to nearly get killed or severely causing so much damage in the final 2 minutes of this episode in order to make sure that she doesn't get the car keys. Did she ever thought about the consequences that Lenny might get arrested? Because as far as I'm concerned, it really showcases of how much that Lori did so much worse, but this is definitely top 5 material. Granted, it may be debatable because there are few of what Lori did in the earlier seasons of how she improved later on, but believe me, no one will probably forget of what she did in this episode. And as for the ending of this episode, it's alright. It's not the best, nor it's the worst. I just felt like that with Lori confessing and the fact that we get this type of ending, I think it's basically an indication that Lenny will never get her driver's license. Which is why that in season 6, while Lori is in college, Lenny needs to get her driver's license in order to handle stuff on her own or having the assist of other characters, or in that case mainly having the request from other characters to take them to places like what Lori did. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest, if Carlota was focusing on getting her driver's license rather than focusing on her homework or a test, it would have been a lot more worse. Believe me, it would have been a lot more worse considering that a lot has happened with that kind of situations in real life. So for me personally, all I can think of is that if Carlota ever got her driver's license, she would probably been on the same levels as Lenny, and they will probably have another thing in common. Let me tell you, the ending of Undivided Attention is better compared to Driving Miss Hazy, since that Carlota officially given up on Fashion Safari by deleting it, and completely did her finals with flying colors. And believe me when I say this, whenever I think about this episode and after watching the launch shot, it kind of shows that Carlota is gaining development in some other capacity. And considering that there was another episode involving Carlota that has her having flaws but also trying to succeed, believe me, Lenny has something involving that kind of development in the sequel of Driving Miss Hazy, and it goes to show that Lenny and Carlota have a lot more in common than you think. I know it's going to be a lot more confusing at first, but considering that this took a long time to finally have a Lenny and Carlota episode comparing against each other, you will see what Carlota lacks in the same stress situation of what Lenny went through in the season 6 episode. Because as far as I'm concerned, once I get to that video, upon doing the other videos, it'll probably be worth the wait, and I'm not even sure if there's going to be a third Lenny and Carlota video project involving the Loud House vs. Casagrandes. Just keep that in mind. It's gonna be mainly of find something out of pure luck, or the fact that I'm running out of episode ideas involving videos, involving mainly the characters instantly just learning from something, or at the same time, at the end of the day, they just end up forgetting entirely. Though then again, these videos are still fun to make. May confuse you, but at the same time, I've been doing these for nearly half a year at this point, and that's not even counting the several videos I made last year. So, Undivided Attention is the superior episode over the Loud House, and even though I did enjoy the Loud House episode Driving Miss Hazy, it doesn't change the fact that the issues centering around that episode is a lot more bigger compared to the problems in this episode. Let's be real, as much as I tried to look in the positives in one of the early years of the Loud House, it doesn't mean that most of the good episodes don't have problems. And for me personally, this episode, even if it does have some great qualities, the negatives are way more bigger, which really says a lot of how much that Lori has changed as the series progressed. Hopefully, the Casagrandes will get more points along the way, but at the same time, when it comes to future videos, it's mostly debatable. I'm giving the Loud House's Driving Miss Hazy a 7 out of 10, while the Casagrandes' Undivided Attention gets a 7.5 out of 10.